Hello and welcome to this Core Report Special Edition. We're looking at the preliminary report of the accident involving Air India's B787 aircraft, which crashed in Ahmedabad on the 12th of June, 2025, exactly a month ago from today. And the report has some very interesting insights. The report was, by all definitions of how long it should take, delayed. And the delays obviously caused a vacuum in terms of information into which has poured a lot of misinformation and speculation in the last month or so. Now, no one can expect reports to be released in 24 hours or 48 hours, but it does appear that it has taken longer than it should have. Having said that, the feeling is that the report is pretty comprehensive for what it is, which is a preliminary report. Full reports can take almost a year to come. So while it brings out several aspects of what happens, let's highlight two or three quick things. Firstly, that the investigation is still in progress. And a few of the aspects that were speculated about, for example, quality of fuel, the condition of the aircraft at the point of takeoff or when it crashed, whether all the flaps were deployed, and so on. All of that seems to be fine, and there is no that does not seem to be an issue there. The A lot of other additional details are obviously being gathered, as would be the case. The critical part, of course, in this whole investigation so far, or what it's revealed, is that the engines did get switched off or were switched off barely moments into takeoff. And that caused that complete engine failure that we've been obviously talking about for some time. Immediately after that, there was an attempt to run the engines again, but obviously that was not in time enough for the engine or the aircraft to develop sufficient thrust to get back into the air again, or get into the air again, and therefore it crashed. So a lot of the forthcoming conversations and discussion will center around why those engines or switches went into off and then subsequently on again. But the bigger question, I guess, is why it went off, which is unusual for at that particular point of time. So there are two kinds of situations. One is obviously that there is a serious and inexplicable technical software malfunction on in the aircraft and its system, which caused those engines to stop, and which is why maybe the pilots try to revive it. And the second is, of course, that the pilots themselves did something because they saw something or felt something, or some other extraneous force caused them to actually switch it off, or one of the pilots switched it off and then the other pulled back. Because there is that one snatch of a conversation, which I would admit is not fully revealing, where one pilot seems to be asking the other, why did you switch it off? And the other one says, I did not. So let's pick up on all of this. I'm joined by Captain Sam Thomas of the Airline Pilots Association, an active pilot himself and a former Boeing 737 pilot. Remember, we are talking about a Boeing aircraft, though it's a 787, which is much bigger. Sam, let me begin with you, or with one of the points that I think is critical in a way to where this investigation has been left off, which is that there are no recommended actions by the investigation body at this point to the B787 or the GNX-1B engine operators and manufacturers, which means they're saying that they're not seeing anything in this investigation so far which suggests that there is any problem with either the aircraft or the engines which would cause them to issue or request an advisory. So let's begin there.
First of all, Govind, I've flown a larger 777 as a trainer, so this is well within, and I'm rated on the 787 as well. Anyways, so be that as may, what we were talking about is, firstly, we all need to calm down a little bit. The rhetoric that is going on currently with the pilots, somebody has suggested that this is a deliberate act by the pilot and everybody is up in arms. So we are appealing to everybody to calm down and first take a look at this report. Now, the reason why we sort of objected to this kind of report is that, firstly, it was released at 1:30 in the middle of the night post the deadline. What was the necessity to do that? Secondly, it is not signed by anybody, and it's just a piece of paper. So we still don't know whether it is authentic or not. What we would have liked is the AAIB to have a weekly meeting with all journalists sitting there and saying, this is what we have done, this is where we are, this is where we are going to go, and this is the only information that we can give you at this time. Please wait for our next briefing. This is what we expect from an air accident investigation board. Now, to do that, firstly, you need a mature air accident investigation board. Here, we believe that this rehabilitation center of ex Air Force officers and not even of the flying cadre are not leading to the best case scenario for the pilots as such. Because if you see, the terms are loosely mentioned, where we believe that this is a translated or a dictated report to an Indian, and it says the fuel control switch is transitioned from run to cut off. Why don't you say whether somebody put it off or put it on, or did it transition on its own? Now, is it possible to transition on its own? Up until now, I believed no. However, there is a bulletin which is mentioned within this preliminary report, which states that Boeing has asked people to check for these in every Boeing airplane, but do it
So
at your
that was
leisure.
triggered by a 737, which is actually why I mentioned your experience in that aircraft.
Yeah. The 737 is pretty much similar. I mean, the 777 and the 787, as far as the fuel cutoff switches are concerned, are exactly identical. The 737 has a little bit more. What can I say? I feel it's a little bit more robust because they have a
Mhm.
mechanical lock there. So does this. But the 787 also has the FADEC that has extensive control over the fuel flow as well. Now, people tend to confuse. These are technical terms. It's not easy for the layman to find out, but fuel cutoff switches and fuel shut-off valve are two different things. When you cut off the fuel cutoff switch, you will make the uh, fuel shutoff valve to go off. However, the FADEC also has the ability to put the fuel shutoff valve off under certain conditions. Now, here there is a reference to the pilot cutting off. Let's assume that the pilot cut off both the switches and then put it back again. Now, that's exactly what you're supposed to do as per the checklist if you lose thrust on both engines. Now, the moment you lose that, the checklist has something called the memory items. The memory item says fuel cutoff switch to cut off, then to run, press and hold the rat for 1 second. This is the exact checklist, and that is what has been carried out. Now, what's alarming for us is the fact that the same report, almost identical, 2 days back, is published in the Wall Street Journal. Where did they get that information from? So we believe that this is going down the line exactly as we expected. Start a small narrative, calibrated leaks, push it to the side of pilot error, and then things become much more easier.
So let's take a step back, Sam, and look at what we know and what we don't. So at this point of time, we either have a serious malfunction which caused those engines to cut off, or we have some manual or human intervention which caused them to do that. Am I on the right track so far?
Correct, correct, absolutely right.
Okay. So at this point, I mean, given your experience as well, so what is looking to you as more probable?
See, it again would be very, like we said from the first show onwards. We did the first show with you, and the first show onwards, what we were saying is that invariably, whatever we say, where are those experts now who said flap is not in position? Like you very rightly mentioned, birds all entered this airplane. It took off at the end of the runway. Nothing like that is mentioned in the report. Aircraft took off exactly where it's supposed to take off. And therefore, this kind of once in a lifetime situations need complete access to data before an assessment can be made. Now, if I can push your attention back to the 737 MAX crashes. When the
Hmm.
crash happened, they said it's pilot error. They closed that issue completely. When the second crash happened, the Ethiopians were much smarter. They didn't let these black boxes go out of their sight, and therefore they were able to get to the bottom of it. and find out that there is a system called MCAS. Now, MCAS is a system that Boeing did not even believe the pilot should know. And that has been, the Congress has taken them for a, I mean, to the cleaners with that. But at the end of the day, the CEO got a good bonus. He went out and there's a new CEO and all's hunky dory. Back again, now we have the 787. Will we wait for another 787 somewhere else to fall down before we go to
Right.
the
But
actual?
Sam, one distinction is that the 737 MAX was a brand new aircraft, relatively untested. This is been in the air for more than almost 15 years plus. This aircraft itself was about 11 years old. So, and it had done a previous flight. So, the situation or conditions cannot be the same, can they?
Not entirely true. You see, with the 7, this whole thing has a history to it. Boeing was one of the greatest airplane manufacturers in the world until they merged with McDonnell Douglas. Post the merger, as that is on public domain, commercial interests have always overtaken flight safety. Due to shortage of staff, the FAA also has sort of taken a lenient view of what they have to do, and that's how the Max happened. Now, as far as, because the Max is crashed, everybody said that it's a brand new airplane, it needs this, that, and the other. Now, just because an airplane has not crashed, that does not mean that everything is hunky dory with the 787. Now, compounding that fact is the number of whistleblowers who have come out and said, not with regards to the engine, it's with the regards to the airframe. They're constantly telling, hey, please look at this. There have been 2 whistleblowers who are no more. So all these things don't add up to great, you know,
Right.
net
No,
factor.
and that's a fair point. I mean, and everyone knows the problems that Boeing is going through back home, including, as you said, there have been congressional hearings, people have been fired, there have been whistleblowers across several aircraft programs. So, but the point is, let me come back to this particular flight and the day it was taking off. The question really is, what could have happened in that short period? And where the reason I'm asking all this is really the question that everyone else is asking, which is it safe to fly in general, and maybe Boeing aircraft in specific, and 787s even more specifically? So, what is it that could have happened that we need to be thinking about, or we need to be concerned about? And that question, I'm sure, applies as much to you as a pilot as it does to me as a passenger.
Yeah, so we still stick by that statement. As a pilot, it wouldn't be fair for me to say that, like flying is, I would always say that flying is the best. I've done this all my life. I've never, marginal emergencies I have encountered, but by and large, we never have an issue with uh, airplane travel. Now, whenever there is a paradigm shift in technology, these things come up. If I can take you back to the Airbus A320, uh, it was a fly by wire airplane, and it was one of the first passenger fly by wire airplanes. When that came, India was one of the first customers, and unfortunately, we had the first crash of an Airbus 320 in my city of Bangalore. Now, then they pointed out immediately that probably the Indians are not good enough to fly it. And about a month later, a French pilot doing a fly past went down with the exact same A320. Then they sat up to take notice. So when this technology improves by quantum leaps, there is a man machine interface that needs a lot of attention. And every time the engineers believe that the pilot is redundant and is not required, what we are trying to tell them is, you cannot come up with all possible scenarios where you could have a completely autonomous airplane as of now. 20 years down the line, maybe that's going to be the fact, but as of now we are far away from that. The more technology you introduce into these airplanes, they seem to fail together or fail at the wrong time, and this has happened repeatedly. But like you asked about air travel in general, no, it's as safe as it was at any time. And Boeing's, I swear by Boeing's, I've always flown Boeing's. Now I'm flying Gulfstream, that's a different airplane altogether. But I'd still say your listeners shouldn't be concerned overtly over anything as far as traveling in a Boeing airplane or any other airplane is concerned.
So, which brings us back to that fateful day. So, what is it then that we should be once again thinking about? So, we've talked about what a failure could be, though I'm not sure I've got a clear explanation of what that failure could be. We've talked about a possible manual intervention which led to those engines being shut down. So, if let's say there is missing data, which you're saying that there is, because of course there is, this is a preliminary investigation after all, and it's only 30 days, though we were expecting it earlier. What else would we need to have a better understanding of what went on that afternoon of June 12th?
And this whole thing could be so mysterious, Govind, that once you have the complete data of the DFDR and the CVR, along with the ATC transcripts, all collated together, could give you an entirely different picture. We are
Sure.
all now fixated on both the engines. Yes, we know both the engines did not develop sufficient power. That's why the airplane is where it is. Now, the thing is, why each of these air accident investigations focuses on why it happened, how can it be avoided in future. Unfortunately, we are going in the other direction, which is who can we blame. So each air accident investigation has a recommendation at the end of it so that it's never ever repeated. When you cut corners and say that nothing has happened, you will go the 737 max way. Indonesia, if you had agreed that there's a problem with the airplane, Ethiopia would not have happened. So that's what we are trying to say, that give us the entire data or make us party to this discussions, and we'll be able to throw better light on that rather than somebody who's not involved in flying sitting and trying to find out a solution to this. And Govind, by no means am I trying to avoid your question to say that this is what happened. I wish I could say that you give me the data in 1 week, I'll tell you exactly what happened. That much I can say. But in the absence of that, and in the presence of so much of secrecy, it is well and nigh impossible for anybody, leave alone me, anybody, to come up with definitive answers.
So, what could be those? I mean, I just come back to that same point. I mean, what is the missing data point then in this report at this point? That's the first question. Second is, why do you feel this report is blaming the pilots?
It
Since you responded as
says
an
it wants
organization.
it. Yes, yes. As an organization, what we are saying, it infers that the start levers transition, or rather fuel control switches transitioned from run to cut off. Now that can be done only by one person, that is the pilot. Then there is a select uh, CVR transcript which says, "Did you do it?" Other pilot. Now, which pilot said to whom, "Did you do it?" Did Clive tell Sumit, or did Sumit tell Clive? I don't know who did that. And that is pushing a set of experts who are waiting in studios to jump to the conclusion. One elderly gentleman very clearly said that this is a complete pilot action. Now, so that's what all the pilots are agitated about. So this is what we're trying to say, that if you selectively put out portions of conversations and bits of data, it is open to the public to interpret. And we as a society believe or are compelled to give our opinion on everything, say from tsunami in Sumatra to malaria in Malawi. You ask any Indian, he'll give you an opinion. He'll give you an authentic opinion because he feels that that is what he should do. And unfortunately, in air crash investigations, this can lead to very, very undesirable consequences as we are facing right now. These are the reasons why we believe a lot more transparency, a lot more involvement of subject matter experts are required.
But the report itself, I mean, apart from this point that you're making about the transition of the fuel switch, is not saying anywhere that a pilot or a mechanical factor could have been responsible for those engines shutting down. Isn't that true?
It's true. It's a veiled kind of reference. That's uh, who could have put the switches out, and who that transcript which says, "Did you cut it off?" That means you cut it off or I cut it off. One of the two, right? So that's an inference right there that somebody cut off these fuel switches, and I am trying to inquire whether you did it or I did it. It doesn't happen that way in an airplane. Before I cut out a switch, I ask engine number two, confirm. The co-pilot says affirm. Then I cut off engine number two. That's how it's done. It's very methodically done. Now, where he has lost this engine is 3 seconds into takeoff. There is no time for anything to happen, and reflex kicks in. That's what I'm assuming happened. And you cut off and put it back inside and hope like hell that the engine starts. Thereafter, he had no hope of whatever, the engines haven't spooled up. So, before this is definitively said, I believe that we need much more data and much more responsible people looking into the data.
So let me come back to the technical part of the question. Have you seen anything anywhere that is similar to what we saw happening in Ahmedabad? Maybe at in flight, much higher altitude, where obviously pilots have recovered, which was a similar sort of engine, dual engine failure, which could have been triggered by an automatic cutoff.
Yes, in fact, there is a Boeing data itself talking of ANA, which is the Japanese airline,
Hmm.
which landed and the fuel to both the engines were cut off. Now, they're given about two, three scenarios in which it would happen. They're always very good to give you as to why it happened, not whether it's going to happen. So, the exact same thing has happened with the Japanese airplane, the 787. And now you have both engines out. Fortunately, you were on the runway. You had just landed and it cut off both. That's a total electrical failure, FADEC involved, cut off of the fuel shut-off valve. That is exactly what happened there. And it's documented. Now, in the air, this is the first time it's happening, at least to my knowledge. The Japanese were very lucky. It happened during landing. Indians were unlucky. It happened during takeoff.
So, Sam, just walk us through how things. I mean, we are talking really about now a few minutes, and literally it's 2 or 3 minutes that everything happened. Walk us through what would have been happening in that cockpit from the time, let's say, the aircraft is just about ready for to take off or start rolling down the runway. If you were on whichever, I mean, you were on the first officer's seat or you were the captain flying.
Yeah, both. See, in a normal takeoff, they would line up the airplane and push the thrust levers forward to about 40% N1, then press a button called the toga button, takeoff go around button. That will push the thrust levers automatically forward because there is an auto throttle system that will push the
Hmm.
aircraft automatically forward, and it will, while you're monitoring the instruments, the aircraft is hurtling down the runway. It reaches a speed of V1, which is called the action initiation speed, previously known as the decision speed. The moment you reach this decision speed or the action initiation speed, your hand comes off. The pilot flying takes his hand off the thrust levers and puts it on the control column so that there is no chance for him to even inadvertently reject, because it's not safe to reject the takeoff once you're past V1. Then you reach a speed called VR, or velocity rotation, wherein the co-pilot or the pilot monitoring calls out rotate, and you pull the control column to a particular 12 to 15 degrees, and the airplane takes off and reaches a speed V2, which is the safe speed. Now, the moment the aircraft lifts off, there is a call from the pilot monitoring to say positive climb, after he establishes clearly that there is positive climb, and then the gear up. Now, between this takes about 2 to 3 seconds. Now, between these 2 3 seconds is what the report says there has been a problem. Now it is out of the normal window. There's a startle effect. You don't believe the moment you're, despite you practicing a million times on engine failures, the moment it happens, there is a startle effect. So a couple of seconds are lost in figuring out, not necessarily whatever you say is coherent or
Hmm.
exactly what needs to be said. So you cannot take those into consideration and start uh, basing your entire judgment on those. Everything has to be seen in its entirety. Now, the moment this happens, what every other emergency, the memory items are at 400 feet. Whereas in a dual engine failure, it is immediate, irrespective of where you are, because you may not reach 400 feet. So this action has been, and the moment there's an emergency, the captain takes over, irrespective of whether he is pilot monitoring or the pilot flying. The first call is, I have controls. He takes over controls and does the memory items. This, we believe, is exactly what has happened unless we get data to the contrary. So until such time, I'm going to stick to the theory that this is exactly what has happened. He's tried to relight not possible, put maintain straight ahead. Unfortunately for him, there were buildings. He gave a mayday call as well. And it's typical for air traffic control to ask you, when you say mayday, 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 he's going to say again, call sign. Aircraft calling mayday, say again your call sign. But there was no time to answer that, because this is VHF, line of sight communication. Even if they tried to answer, they might not reach the air traffic control tower. And it has impacted those buildings. That, I believe, is exactly what has happened.
Right. So you're saying that whatever, I mean, if there was any remedial action that was even attempted, it was already too late, because for whatever reason, the engines had got switched off. The altitude was too low. And of course, they were heading, I mean, it's a airport that's surrounded by buildings, and they were heading into an area that was obviously quite dense in terms of construction, and of course, people who unfortunately also lost their lives. So, if you're saying that there is no real precedence to this, except that one aircraft example that you quoted, which had already landed of an All Nippon Airways, what is it then we can go by? I come back to my primary question, Sam, which is that as a pilot yourself or as a passenger, what is it that I can take away which either gives me comfort or leaves me continuing to be concerned about whether it's going to be safe to fly again or not?
Uh, Once again, you see, this is once in like your own quote says that this has been flying for 15 years, and in 15 years it has crossed well over 1 million hours, and this is one incident that has happened. That again is a very rare occurrence. Now, for it to happen repeatedly, there should be some real carelessness, oversight, which doesn't happen in air traffic or aviation aircraft operations, basically, because these airplanes are checked and rechecked at multiple levels, and they have redundancies in place. But from time to time, some of these equipment are known to fail, and I don't know how to put it in a better way, but I would still say that compared to an automobile, this is far more regulated, far more controlled, and far more safer, I would put it, definitely. So unless the
Hmm.
full report comes out, I won't be able to tell you as to what the recommendation should
Right.
be, because we should know exactly what the problem is to give a recommendation.
Captain Sam Thomas, a pleasure talking to you as always. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Govind.